Imagine you're sitting in a crowded coffee shop.
Just kind of minding your own business.
Right, looking down at your phone.
Hmm.
And you think you are completely alone in your own little, digital bubble.
Yeah.
But what if there is someone standing right next to you? And I don't mean just someone you weren't paying attention to, but someone who is physically, scientifically, and socially invisible.
A literal ghost.
Exactly. They can see every keystroke you make, they can hear your breathing, but if you reached out to touch them, they just vanish. They're moving through the physical world without leaving a single trace.
I mean, it is a terrifying thought. That kind of proximity without presence.
Yeah.
It completely shatters our basic assumptions about reality and, well, safety, really.
Because we rely so much on being able to see threats.
Right. Mainly because we rely so heavily on the physical world being predictable. We just assume that if someone is near us, we will know it.
And learning how to survive as that ghost is exactly what we are unpacking today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are looking at a really brilliant critique on the evolution of the spy thriller. Our mission is to explore how the classic espionage narrative, like the standard novel full of car chases and shootouts, has completely mutated to survive the digital age.
It really has.
We are tracking the psychological evolution of the modern shadow operative.
Which is, honestly, a necessary evolution.
Yeah.
The sources we are analyzing today, they don't just examine the mechanics of fiction.
Right.
They offer this really profound critique of modern surveillance, the absolute death of privacy, and ultimately, our own moral compasses. We are looking at what happens to the human psyche when the world stops watching you.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand where we are, we kind of have to look at where we came from, right?
Definitely.
The research highlights this massive, profound ontological shift in the thriller genre. And just to clarify that term for everyone, ontology is basically the philosophical study of being.
Of existence itself, yeah.
Exactly. So the very nature of how these characters exist in their world has fundamentally changed. We are moving from the 20th century Cold War operative to something entirely new.
It's a huge leap.
The source gives us this perfect side-by-side comparison. On one hand, we have the classic, Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Identity, and on the other hand, the modern evolution, Ghassan Jahar's The Man Who Vanished.
And that comparison isolates the variable that has changed so beautifully. The 20th century protagonist, like Jason Bourne, he was driven by what we call a teleological journey.
Meaning he has an end goal.
Right. His entire existence was defined by a singular purpose: to recover a lost past. The core driver is identity amnesia. He wakes up with bullets in his back and no memory. Therefore, the entire narrative is an external inquiry. Basically, who am I?
Right, it's all about gritty realism. You've got the cold, rain-slick streets of Europe, tactical tradecraft, martial arts. Bourne is basically just punching his way through bad guys to find his own name on a birth certificate somewhere.
That's a good way to put it.
But then we look at Jahar's protagonist in The Man Who Vanished. This isn't about losing your memory at all. This is about physical erasure.
Exactly. The modern shadow operative isn't suffering from amnesia. They know exactly who they are.
Yeah.
But they exist in this liminal space, navigating what the text calls the brutal physics of invisibility. The thematic focus has completely shifted away from that external inquiry of finding out who they are to a deeply internal inquiry, which is, who do I become when no one is watching?
I was thinking about this, and I realized it's kind of like the difference between a broken computer and a targeted cyber attack.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, Bourne losing his memory is like someone wiping your hard drive. You're frantically running recovery software, trying to get your data back, trying to figure out what was on there before the crash.
Right, trying to piece it back together.
But Jahar's operative facing this physical erasure, that's like having your entire digital footprint, your bank accounts, and your social security number completely deleted by the state. You know exactly who you are, but the entire world looks at you and says, you don't exist.
That is a brilliant way to frame the distinction. And that shift is paramount. Because if the state deletes your existence, the narrative tension has to move.
It can't just be about finding a file anymore.
Exactly. It is no longer a physical chase through the streets of Paris. The primary conflict becomes an internal civil war. The stakes elevate from mere physical survival to a desperate battle for character integrity.
Because if you don't exist on paper and literally nobody can see you, you can do whatever you want.
Yes, and the suspense arises from whether the character will succumb to what the report calls the corrosive blend of desire and entitlement. When you possess the power of invisibility, which is enabled by things like quantum stealth and global digital networks, You weren't just evading assassins.
Yeah.
You were evading your own worst impulses. You were trying to remain human in a system designed to completely erase humanity.
But existing as a ghost with this internal civil war brings up a massive structural problem for a writer. I mean, how do you even write that?
It is a challenge.
You can't just throw punches at a fractured psyche. You can't visually show a soul deteriorating using standard punch-and-shoot action scenes.
No, you really can't. Visual descriptions were the absolute hallmark of early action thrillers. But to capture this deeply internal state, modern narratives have had to pivot away from relying solely on what we see.
So what do they do instead?
They have developed this sophisticated, nuanced approach that the research identifies as olfactory literacy.
Wait, I'm struggling with this a bit. Visuals are the entire point of an action thriller.
Usually, yes.
Jawor's book literally jumps from the sun-drenched ruins of Luxor to the high-tech corridors of the Pentagon. Those are massive cinematic visual set pieces. So why is the author so obsessed with the sense of smell to create what the text calls rhythmic meditative prose? It feels totally counterintuitive for a fast-paced thriller.
What's fascinating here is the neurobiology behind that choice. Smell is the brain's most primal architecture for memory.
Okay, I'm tracking.
Visuals are processed, they're analyzed, they take time for the brain to decode. But scent bypasses the analytical brain entirely. It hits the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for raw emotion and behavioral responses, almost instantly.
Oh, wow.
The author uses this olfactory literacy to build a mnemonic architecture.
A mnemonic architecture, meaning like a structured system for triggering memory.
That's the idea, yeah. The character's history isn't reconstructed through finding classified documents in a safe. It is reconstructed through stories told in scent.
That's so poetic.
It really anchors the reader in a visceral, immediate reality. It transcends just reporting the action and blossoms into what the text beautifully calls a poetry in prose.
I see. So instead of, he walked into the room and saw the bad guy, it's the sudden smell of ozone or a specific brand of cheap tobacco or rain hitting hot asphalt.
Exactly.
And that instantly triggers a tidal wave of internal history for the character before they even process the threat visually.
It creates an incredibly intimate, subjective viewpoint. We're locked inside the protagonist's sensory experience.
Yeah.
But because it relies on something as ephemeral and personal as scent, it also highlights their fractured, isolated reality.
Because it's all in the head.
Right. It is highly subjective and therefore potentially an unreliable narrator.
It's an amazing irony, isn't it? Their internal sensory world is incredibly rich and poetic, precisely because their external reality is defined by a complete echoing void.
A total vacuum.
Yeah, they have nothing to hold on to on the outside, so the inside becomes this hyper-vivid landscape.
It is a vital survival mechanism. They cultivate this internal sensory depth to anchor themselves because their external condition is defined by something truly terrifying. The research refers to it as spectral loneliness.
Spectral loneliness. That sounds like something out of a gothic horror story, not a spy novel.
In many ways, the modern thriller borrows heavily from horror, but it's an existential state far more profound than just being alone in an empty room. It is the psychological weight of being a walking breach in reality.
But existing as a breach in reality can't be easy. I mean, you can't just flip a magic switch and disappear.
No, not at all.
How does someone physically maintain that level of invisibility in the real world? The report emphasizes that it relies on the brutal physics of the environment.
Existence for this operative is an exhausting, high-stakes negotiation with the physical world.
There's a scene detailed in the research that literally made my palms sweat. It's this infiltration of the French intelligence.
Oh, that scene is incredible.
Right. And the operative can't just be visually invisible. They have to hide their body heat from high-tech thermal detection sensors.
Which is nearly impossible.
So to do that, the operative is forced to stand agonizingly close to an actual officer, desperately using that officer's body heat to mask their own thermal signature.
That is the perfect illustration of brutal physics.
Just imagine the tension of that. You are inches away from an enemy, matching their breathing, terrified that a single drop of sweat or a spike in your heart rate will cause your heat signature to bloom on a sensor and give you away.
The physical toll is immense, but there is also a dark psychological side to it, which the text calls the voyeur's thrill.
And this is where I want to play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because on the surface, isn't being invisible the ultimate superpower? If you asked 100 people what superpower they wanted, half would say flying and half would say invisibility. So why does the report describe it as this exhausting, lonely, ethical thought experiment?
Because of what happens when you strip away the gaze of the other. Think about how much of our human behavior is heavily moderated by social friction.
Like peer pressure.
Exactly. We act the way we do largely because other people are watching. We fear judgment. We fear consequence.
Right, like we don't cut in line at the grocery store because people will yell at us. Or, on a darker note, look at how people behave on anonymous internet forums.
That is a perfect example.
When the social friction of a face-to-face interaction is gone, the trolling and the cruelty just skyrocket.
You hit the nail on the head. Now scale that anonymous internet trolling up to a physical, lethal reality. When you are a ghost in the machine, completely detached from the human community, that social friction vanishes entirely.
Wow.
You can observe the world, and that voyeur's thrill breeds a corrosive sense of entitlement. Without institutional oversight, without the gaze of society, you are left alone in a moral laboratory. Your invisibility tests the absolute limits of your humanity.
So if society's gaze is gone and you can literally do whatever you want, what stops you from becoming a monster?
That is the central question of the modern thriller. And the answer the text provides is the internal true north.
The internal true north. Because we are currently living in an era that the report calls the death of accountability.
It is a landscape defined by mass surveillance and labyrinths built by liars.
Labyrinths built by liars, that's a heavy phrase.
It is. When social and institutional judgment is corrupt or non-existent, it fails to provide a legitimate moral compass. The state isn't reliably the good guy anymore. The institutions themselves are lying.
So the shadow operative can't rely on patriotism or just following orders because the orders are coming from a corrupt system. They have to rely entirely on their own personal code of integrity.
They have to maintain this code when absolutely no one is watching and when the threat of social consequence has been rendered totally obsolete. And what makes this narrative so compelling is the nature of the protagonists themselves.
Right, they aren't who we think they are.
No, they aren't a lab-grown super soldier programmed for compliance. They are what the research calls a managed character.
A managed character, I love this concept. It's not a pre-trained assassin who was raised in a dark room to be a weapon.
Right.
It's a civilian, a family man who has been turned into a fixer. They are a curator of emotion who actually has to teach themselves lethal instincts just to protect the innocent.
They have to fight to remain a defender, rather than allowing themselves to become just another weapon wielded by the state.
Which is so relatable to you, to me, to everyone listening. Obviously, the physical stakes are different, but we all curate our digital shadows. We all act a little differently when we think nobody is watching our browsing history.
Absolutely.
But for this managed character, the stakes of that private morality aren't just feeling about a bad habit. It's the difference between being a hero and becoming a sociopath.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this mirrors the 21st century struggle for all of us. We are all trying to maintain human values in increasingly dehumanized, digitized systems.
Yeah, that's so true.
We are all navigating the erosion of private morality in a world of total digital systems and state-sponsored data tracking. The operative's battle to remain a fixer instead of a monster is a macrocosm of our daily struggle for integrity.
And that relatable, everyday struggle over digital shadows leads us to the most chilling part of the entire analysis. Because the environment these operatives are navigating, it isn't science fiction anymore.
No, it's really not. The contemporary thriller has elevated itself by grounding its narrative firmly in science fact. It acts as a serious critique of modern state power, functioning as a potent cautionary tale.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The report outlines these modern thriller realism markers, and the first one is quantum stealth.
Yes.
Specifically, utilizing lenticular lens technology to achieve actual physical invisibility. Now, my mind immediately goes to Harry Potter's invisibility cloak. Using lenticular lenses to bend light and vanish. Are we absolutely sure this isn't fantasy?
Sounds like it, I know.
So what does this all mean?
It means the technology is real, and in the active stages of military development. To understand how it works, think of a boulder sitting in the middle of a rushing river.
Okay.
The water parts around the rock and seamlessly rejoins on the other side. To someone looking from downstream, they don't see the rock. They just see the continuous flow of water.
Right.
Lenticular lenses do exactly that, but with light waves instead of water. They refract light around an object, creating a literal blind spot for the observer. It is treated in the narrative as a scientific reality with brutal physical limitations, not a magical spell.
That is mind-bending. But the report doesn't stop at invisibility. It also points to Strategic Initiative 47A.
This touches on the looming threat of advanced bioweapons. but not in the way old movies portrayed them.
Right, not just a glowing green vial.
Exactly. This isn't just about dropping a vial of poison. The narrative uses biological warfare as the ultimate tool of state control by intersecting it with telecommunications and digital surveillance.
So we aren't just talking about a pathogen, we are talking about data-driven biological targeting.
Precisely. Imagine a virus whose spread could be modeled, predicted, and perhaps even triggered by analyzing global data networks.
That's terrifying.
It's no longer just about a spy stealing a microchip. It is about the intersection of biology and total state power down to the cellular level.
Which requires an entirely new skill set. The third realism marker the text mentions is digital systems literacy, operating within the cold realities of global data networks.
Yes.
The report specifically mentions the cathedrals of data at the Pentagon. It's not enough to be a guy with a gun anymore. The modern operative has to intimately understand how they are being tracked, analyzed, and predicted by massive algorithms that control these biological and physical weapons.
This raises an important question regarding the purpose of the genre today. By intersecting telecommunications, digital surveillance, and biological warfare, the narrative is no longer mere entertainment.
It's a warning.
It is a stark warning. In a world of institutionalized lies and total surveillance, the state has unprecedented, terrifying reach into our physical and digital lives. The only thing that remains real, the only thing the state cannot entirely control or predict with an algorithm, is the operative's internal integrity.
Wow. So let's take a step back and summarize this incredible journey. The modern spy thriller isn't just a popcorn action movie anymore. It has fundamentally evolved.
It really has.
We've moved away from the kinetic Bourne-style quest to find out who am I, and we've entered Jahar's terrifying territory of physical erasure. It's an exploration of olfactory memory, where scents build the architecture of a character's history because their external world is completely void.
Beautifully said.
We've looked at the brutal physics of remaining unseen, the sheer exhaustion of standing inches from an enemy to mask your own body heat, and ultimately we've seen how these operatives have to find an internal true north in a moral laboratory where the state is watching everything, yet actual accountability is completely dead.
It is a profound shift from tactical tradecraft to psychological survival. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that builds directly on the reality of those cathedrals of data we just discussed.
Okay, lay it on us.
The text talks about state operatives navigating the depth of accountability in labyrinths built by liars. But considering the vast digital networks that hold data on every single one of us, our locations, our habits, our private communications, our social networks, are we the ones slowly being forced into our own personal moral laboratories?
Oh, man.
I mean, think about it. Are everyday citizens becoming managed characters in a system of total surveillance? And if so, when the social friction fades and the algorithms take over, what is your internal true north?
That is a chilling question. Think about that the next time you're sitting in a coffee shop or riding the subway, looking at your phone. Who's really watching the data you generate? And who do you become when you think no one is? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for the invisible strings, and we will catch you next time.